Okay, thanks for joining today. I'm going to talk to you about one of our trials, about the impact of simulated hail injury on the growth and floral yield of transplanted hemp. I want to start off first by acknowledging the company that initiated this research and initiates this type of research all over the country, and that's the National Crop Insurance Services. They're a nonprofit organization that represents interests of private crop insurance companies, and they provide complex risk management protection plans to participating producers. I want to focus on the crop hail insurance side of what they do because that's what we're going to be talking about today. In this, they develop insurance policies that cover predicted losses from hail and other storm damage. This is very data-driven policies, and they are specific to crop and location. This type of research is lacking in hemp. So, we have a lot of work to do. A lot of, companies don't have crop insurance for hemp at this time, as they do for many other crops. So we still have a lot of work to do on this. And I wanted to thank NCIS for initiating this type of research, and of course for their funding for this research. I just wanted to note that this is very preliminary research. This is the first year that we're doing this. And so kind of starting off with very simple, basic questions, but of course, very important questions. What type of damage would a hailstorm cause to hemp? How does hemp respond to that damage? And how does that damage impact the economic value of hemp? So the first question, we wanted to look at the types of damage that a hailstorm could cause to hemp. I want to start with a grower example. I feel it's very important to show that this is happening in real life, and we've heard of many stories of this happening throughout the country. Here's one example in Montana. These are two fields, one in central Montana and one in eastern Montana. Both were seeded in mid-May with good emergence rates and good stand establishment. The first one in central Montana, their hailstorm hit on June 24th, right at the time of male floral initiation. So I will point out this was a dual purpose cultivar. And in this case, they saw things like defoliation, bent stems, and stems that were completely broken at the base. In this case, there was less than a 5% stand recovery. And so those are the two pictures on the top, the before and after that hailstorm. In eastern Montana, this storm hit less than 2 weeks later, right at floral initiation. Again, these plants were about 2 feet tall at the time. They saw bent and broken stands, but in this case, there was 85 to 90% recovery. And so on those bottom two pictures, you could see what some of that damage looked like. They saw some interesting things with this site as well, that some broken plants produced higher branching, bent plants grew with a curved stem, and actually, in some cases, there were higher yields in fields that in the fields that got the hail than the fields that didn't get hit with hail. So interesting things there. So we started initially with kind of some preliminary research. We do have a hail simulation machine. You can see here it's being used on tobacco. So we've used it a lot on tobacco hail research. And so it's a pretty simple machine. It has an ice box and you put in the ice, and it has a fan and an auger, and it's pushing the ice out through that hose. You can see the picture on the right that's actually ice coming out of the hose there. We were able to treat one plant about 5 weeks post-transplant before floral initiation occurred. And you could see here, this happened at July 10th. You could see some bent stems, some defoliation, but very quickly you can see kind of the progress of that recovery over time. We were able to treat another plant 11 weeks post-transplant, and this was after floral initiation. Again, pretty similar with that first picture. And what it looks like, you see bent stems, you see defoliation, overall the drooping plant. And then you can see, again, a little bit, a few weeks later, you can see some of that recovery. But in this case, you can see we are still missing some branches, and there are some gaps there within that plant. Just kind of to put side by side, this is the recovery with the early application pre-flowering, and then that late application post-flowering. You can see that the early treatment of the hail, or the example of a hailstorm hitting early versus late, kind of what that recovery might look like. And here's some data to show that. Of course, this is only one example, but you can see here with the yield that overall any hail treatment had a reduction compared to the check plants that weren't treated at all. But that early application was able to recover better than that late application. And the CBD results looked similar to that. I just wanted to hop back to this picture quick to show that this was very preliminary. It is a great option, but there are some issues with it. It is hard to repeat and do consistently with the angle that you're hitting the plants, the height, the rate, the size of the ice. There's just many factors. And of course, it just uses a lot of ice. And so there are definitely some issues with the mechanics of that. So we wanted to design a study that could replicate what some of that damage might look like, but in a way that could be easily repeated. And so here are some of our treatments. You could see with that first treatment, you have, this is where you're removing the terminal bud. This is at about the second node. And so you're completely cutting that off. The second treatment, a few nodes down, around the fourth node, you're breaking, but not completely removing that stem. So it's more like a bending of the main stem. And then we have the breaking of branches, again, not complete removal, but some breaking, a quarter of the branches, half the branches, and 3/4 of the branches. And so the first two treatments were done post-transplant, a few weeks post-transplant. And so this was pre-flowering, and then all of the treatments were done at floral initiation and prior to harvest. So our second question, how does hemp respond to the damage? We did see some cases of the plants compensating or recovering in unique ways. You can see first in the first picture, that was an example of where we broke 3/4 of the stems going down that main branch. I zoomed in on the right there, and that's one of the branches, and you could see it's creating a scar over that injury site, over that wound. So this was, in many cases, when there was a break, how the plant was recovering, and it was able to continue to produce and leaves after that. This picture in the center was something unique that happened, and something that our grower example also saw. This was when we had that early treatment where we either removed the terminal bud or we broke down at the fourth node. And you can see there's this whirl of stems that are coming out of that injury site. So it's creating multiple branches that are equal rather than the typical growth habit that you see on the left where you have one main terminal stem. And so this is what that looks like on data collection side, where we have the average number of branches. This was measured at flowering and a few weeks before harvest. You can see here with those two early treatments where you have the removal of the terminal bud or that breakage lower down, that there was an increase at the time of flowering. So they produced more branches, whereas all of the other treatments, you see a reduction of the number of branches. And our third question, how does that damage impact the economic value of hemp? There's a few ways we measured this. First, yield. This is the yield of the extractable material. So the dry floral and leaf material per plant. And so you can see here with those early treatments, again, prior to flowering, a little bit of a higher yields compared to the others. All of the others were about 1 pound per plant of extractable material. And so this is just a quick example of the recovery that you might see depending on the timing of this storm event. And then we wanted to look at the cannabinoids. So this is the results of the percent CBD and THC. With the CBD, you can see here that really all of the damage, any type of injury that occurred, there was some reduction in the percent CBD compared to the check where there was no injury. And we saw the same pattern here with the Delta-9 THC percent. Again, that check is a little bit higher. And this is actually really interesting because one thing that kind of that I thought about in the beginning of this industry was that, you know, the THC and CBD, these are plant defense mechanisms. And so the thought was that any type of damage or stress caused to the plant caused by insect, disease, storm, anything would cause a spike in THC. And I know this was a fear for many growers. And in this case, we're seeing an actual reduction based on injury. And so that was something that was really interesting that came out of this. But overall, all of the samples were compliant in this case, but something interesting and that we want to continue to monitor. So kind of just to recap that, what types of damage would a hailstorm cause to hemp? We saw things like defoliation, stem or branch bending and or breaking. One thing that we want to make sure we add to our measurements is defoliation. This will be something that will be a little bit more difficult to replicate. And so this is something that we definitely want to add because we saw a lot of it in both the hail treatment with the hail simulation machine and in our grower example. How does hemp respond to the damage? We did see some compensating mechanisms like increased branching and scarring. And then how does the damage impact the economic value of hemp? Overall, we saw yield and cannabinoid reduction. Again, this is very preliminary data. This is the first year we will continue to do this. We did have plans to do this on floral, fiber, and grain hemp. And so I was just showing you the results from the floral trial this year, but this is something that we will continue to do. I would love, to hear if you guys have grown it, have had any experience with this, or what other types of treatments you think that we could add to this. But we're really excited to continue this work. We know it's really important to be able to provide this data to create policies to cover and reduce the risk for growers. So thank you for your time, and thank you to NCIS again for initiating this research.